Hi, I'm Wheeler Winston Dixon, James Ryan Professor of Film Studies at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and this is Frame by Frame, and I want to say a few words about the director Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock has a unique place in cinema history. He's the only director who can be considered a genre. A Hitchcock film is almost immediately recognizable. You know what you're going to get. But it didn't start out that way. He made films in Germany, believe it or not, in the beginning of his career, because in England his films were considered just too outre. And so he made films like The White Shadow, which has just been rediscovered, and The Pleasure Garden, which was sort of a romance. But his first big breakthrough film is The Lodger, which was shot in 1926, which is a Jack the Ripper story starring Ivor Novello. In 1929, he directed the first British talkie called Blackmail.
No! Let me go! Let me go!
Actually shot as a silent film, but Hitchcock was creative enough to turn the thing into a sound film when he discovered the leading actress could not speak English and they couldn't dub. He had someone stand right outside of the camera range and read her lines while she simply mouthed them. So he instantly adapted to changes in film technology. By the 1930s, he was making things like The 39 Steps in 1935, which is considered one of the great spy films. Shortly after that, The Man Who Knew Too Much, The Lady Vanishes. And in 1940, he comes to America and makes Rebecca, based on Daphne du Maurier's novel for David O. Selznick.
Do you think the dead come back and watch the living?
Hitchcock always storyboarded his films very, very aggressively. He always said that storyboarding was the most interesting part of the film and shooting the film was the least interesting part of the film. Famous story is told about Rebecca that after Selznick screened the first rough cut, he said, "That's great, now where are the trims?" The editor brought in a reel that had about 600 feet on it, or about 6 minutes of footage, because he had shot only what he needed.
Before they get to us, go out and stop the music and tell them all.
Honey, this is the Sutton Mansion. I'm just a guy from Glendale, California, wanted by the police. They'll grab me as soon as I open my mouth.
Through the 1940s, he made a series of really interesting films like Saboteur with Robert Cummings, which is about Nazi saboteurs in the United States. Shadow of a Doubt with Joseph Cotten, which is one of the more acidic tales of small-town America.
The boat's too small right now for me, and it's German.
Lifeboat, which a bunch of people are in a lifeboat who have just been sunk by a Nazi sub who are trying to survive in the sea. Spellbound, a psychological drama.
Two fellows meet, like you and I. No connection between them whatsoever. Each one has somebody that he'd like to get rid of. So, they swap murders.
But then in the 1950s, he begins to move into a deeper territory with Strangers on the Train, which is a psychological thriller with Robert Walker. Then he goes into Vertigo with Jimmy Stewart. Rear Window with Jimmy Stewart as a photographer who is trapped in his apartment after an accident and views his neighbors and discovers that one of them is a murderer. And then, of course, in 1960, at this point, he's making features for Paramount and his television show for Universal, and he starts to make Psycho. That's a whole story in itself, and we'll do that in a separate frame by frame. But Hitchcock pretty much shattered the censorship barrier with Psycho. And after that, unfortunately, though, he never really topped it. He made The Birds in 1963. He made Marnie with Tippi Hedren shortly thereafter. His last film was The Family Plot in 1976. But he is definitely considered the master of suspense, a brilliant technician who is also an artist, and this is the important thing about him. He was one of the first people that the French picked up on as the auteur of all of his films. So Alfred Hitchcock, a person whom everybody knows about, the master of suspense.